Good afternoon. This is Richard Cheng with the Sativa Segment. We're filming episode 14 today. Before we get started, I'd like to say that this episode is fueled by Cholson M&A Advisors. It's a sell-side business brokerage firm here in Dallas, Texas. If you'd like to know more about it, they are listed on LinkedIn and several other platforms. Today, we have a guest. He lives here in Dallas, Texas, but his operations is in Oklahoma. Welcome, TJ Mehta. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming. Before we get started to talk about your business and your background, I'd like to let you know that you are officially the first guest on the Sativa Segment in this new studio. Now, this may be temporary, but historically, people have always seen the brick wall background. Right. So this is a bit of a change for me, and obviously, you're the first guest that is experiencing this whole backdrop.
It's great. I like it. I hope it's not messing with your mojo.
I hope my mojo does not change. So I would like to bring the right mojo for this episode. So tell me a little bit about you. I know we've worked together. Just to be clear, you are a client of mine, and I've represented you legally. Mm-hmm. But tell me a little bit about you as an individual. I haven't gotten to know you too well, but I do know that you operate in several aspects within the cannabis industry.
That's correct.
But that's not your primary job.
That is not my primary job. So I'm here. I've been in Dallas since 2012. Moved here after college. And I grew up in Miami, Florida. But I moved here after college. My parents kind of insisted that I come and be close to them. They moved here in 2008 when I left for college. And I started my main business, in which I import tile and natural stone, marble, granite, etc. And that's my primary business. That's what I do on a daily basis. That's a significantly bigger business than the cannabis business. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of my baby, and I do it every day, and we've done well and grown it significantly. And that's based here in Dallas. I sell nationwide, but it's based here in Dallas. And then cannabis was my first investment in another business outside of this one, when I started to find success and stability in this one. Mm-hmm. And it's also the first time I have partnered with somebody. So that I did partner with someone on the cannabis business.
That's always can be a blessing and a curse.
It's a learning experience,
depending on who you get in cahoots with, right?
Yeah, well, you can't do everything yourself.
Yeah,
as I learned. So
yeah, But let's back up just a little bit. I'd love to hear more about your investment strategy and also your decision to invest into the cannabis industry. But you mentioned that you're from Miami, Florida.
Correct.
We do have that in common, and that I spent some time in South Florida. That's where I went to law school. Mm-hmm. But where did you go to college?
I actually went to a small school in Ohio. It's called Oberlin College. It's
a
small liberal arts school, and I played Division III football there. So
that's great.
It's a long story, but it's not where my parents wanted me to go.
What position did you play?
I played center, and
no kidding.
I was a little thicker back then. I was quick, but I played center, and then I played a little bit of defense. They moved me around. Okay. I only played a couple of years, but
good school though.
Yeah, it's a good school. It's cool. It's different. Mm-hmm. And I no regrets. Glad I went out there. Midwest in the middle of cornfields was not what I was anticipating. Mm-hmm. And growing up in South Florida, I'd never experienced winter like that.
You didn't have any desire to go back to South Florida and live there?
I would have liked to at that time, but I'm actually really grateful that I moved to Texas. Texas has been fantastic. Mm-hmm. Good place for family, good place for business, especially during COVID. Sure. It was nice to be here versus some of my friends' experiences along the coast. And
more restrictions on the coastal cities.
Yeah, there were way fewer restrictions here, which you could cut either way on how you feel about that. But for us, it was nice. We were still able to operate and just to feel a sense of normalcy here that people didn't elsewhere.
Okay, good. And so you moved here. Mm-hmm. You of course are in the tile business, and we've talked about that. Although that's not primarily of how I got to know you.
Right.
You've made some money in that industry, and that still continues to be your bread and butter.
Correct.
When did you decide to consider cannabis as a potential investment opportunity?
So I always had a fascination with cannabis. And there was already all this media, they had Weeds and all these other shows kind of discussing. There was a mystique around it for my generation. And there were friends of mine when we were getting out of college, some that actually left college early to head west for the green rush, moved to California, moved to Oregon, moved to Washington to get themselves involved. And so I already had some level of interest. I'd visited a friend of mine in Seattle that was doing well, and another friend that was doing well in Colorado. They weren't business owners, but they had gotten involved in the industry. I'd found it fascinating. So I had a desire to do it, but I also had I needed to build up liquidity to be able to invest.
Sure,
and then those markets, as they became more established, became very expensive. And I needed something in arm's reach. That was certainly my condition. So what I always told myself is, once it comes to Texas, I'm jumping in,
Which is ironic because historically Texas has been fairly restrictive in many ways, right?
Yeah, and it's likely, as you informed me, it's likely to be one of the last places to unleash that industry.
Like highly unlikely,
right?
Until the very end, right?
There you go. So, but I told this to my now partner, who I met through my network here in Dallas. I knew him to be a pretty honest, diligent guy who clearly had a ton of experience in cannabis. How that came about, I can't say, but he was an enthusiast. He knew what was going on, and I always said to him, I said, "Hey, look, you seem like you're a guy I would do that business with, and if it ever comes within the way I told him, I said, if it's inside driving distance, then I take a hard look at it." And we didn't bring it up for a couple of years, and I was actually in India in February of 2019, and I get a call from this guy, and I said, "Oh man, what's going on? This must be real late back in Dallas." And he said, "Hey, guess what? It's illegal in driving distance." And I was intrigued, and I told him, "Hey, as soon as I get back, let's jump in the car." I put a retainer in with an attorney in Oklahoma City. He said, "Hey, it's legal medically as of a couple of months in Oklahoma." And I was genuinely interested. I put a retainer down with an attorney up there. That's the first person I wanted to talk to. Hey, what are the rules? Is this real? Can we actually do this? And we went up and then got the ball rolling. So
that's awesome. So you created this venture in Oklahoma.
Correct.
How did you decide what part of or what segment of the cannabis industry to get into?
I was pretty fixated on retail.
Okay. And why is that?
Because and some of this was I didn't have all my facts straight, but I figured the barrier to entry in retail, I felt we had the competence to do it, right? And also my intuition was the most valuable thing to have is a customer base. That if you have access to a retail customer base, that's a terribly valuable asset for a business in the early goings. So I found everything I'd studied about getting into processing or growing seemed very high liability, high likelihood of failure. And I also, early on said, hey, there's not a whole lot of B2B business here for us to take in the early running. So I figured we could leverage the market at a relatively lower cost, buy and sell product through a retail shop. The idea of a grow then and even now, I'm not as comfortable with, because I knew I'd already been exposed to a lot of disaster stories. It's a long turnaround before you can flip the crop and truly cultivate, and many things can go wrong. So I didn't think we had we didn't have the experts in our corner that could really get after it. On the processing end, I hadn't thought about it too hard, but I knew we were going to get into it. I knew that was a vertical we'd pursue after retail, but retail was my priority.
Okay. And so your vision was to have like a storefront.
Correct.
Where consumers will come in, buy and leave.
Correct.
Why Oklahoma though?
That's just circumstantial.
Okay.
If it had been Texas, I would have been doing backflips here. I would have done whatever was necessary to do it here, but it was close. My partner was actually originally from Oklahoma, had Oklahoma residency.
Okay.
And I just wanted to jump into the industry on the early side. I didn't want to get into an established market.
Was this still in 2019?
This is 2019. I think late or summer or late 2018 is when they had gone ahead and passed it and said, hey, we are now legalizing this for medical sales.
Yeah.
And that's what I recall. That may not be right. Maybe it had been happening longer, but this is when he brought it to my attention.
Yep.
And I said, hey, if you're willing to be boots on the ground, move to Oklahoma, be boots on the ground, I will fund this venture.
Because you and I didn't meet until after
I was already
2021 or so,
correct.
or
That's
around
right.
2021 is
That's
when
right.
you and I started working together.
That's right.
And you contacted me through a common friend of ours.
Yep.
And we started working on a few things regarding your cannabis ventures.
Correct.
Okay. And I guess moving forward, how did you see your business progress once you got the storefronts moving and you got into the processing?
Well, it wasn't easy to get those storefronts moving.
Okay.
So
tell me about some of the challenges.
That first, it's interesting. I don't know if this is applicable across the United States. I would imagine it is to some degree, but we didn't have any leverage in the market. So when you had to have a lease in place, you had to have your LLC established and a lease in place in order to apply for a cannabis license. And when we went, established the LLC, that didn't take a whole lot of time or effort. And we established the LLC, and then we started shopping retail, where could we place a lease or purchase a property? And the complication of purchasing a property is banks will not, there is no lending of any official capacity happening. It's all private lending at terribly high interest rates. So
now we're going back to the whole banking challenges,
which we'll get to, I'm sure.
Sure. Yeah.
But so we had to lease. That became evident. But I wasn't going to lie to a bank and then put a dispensary in there. It would have caused a lot of problems. And so we had to lease. And I'll tell you something. When this was new in Oklahoma, the number of landlords that said absolutely not, there will not be cannabis in my facility, was ubiquitous. It was, I'd say 9 out of 10, but it was more like 99 out of 100 spaces available would simply refuse us.
So what were those discussions like?
Nothing. We'd submit an LOI, and the instant they became aware it was for cannabis, I said no. Now those guys that were open, and so first we had to find a place that would be open to it, right?
Yeah.
And the guys that were open were of a certain variety. They're very specific variety. It wasn't in the nicest plazas or the best spaces at your disposal, unless you got very lucky.
They were open-minded.
So some of these guys that were open-minded were also opportunistic. So we found a space. My partner found a space that was in a great location, dilapidated building. And I'll tell you the specifics. It was the entire property, including a big yard, parking, and what are now 2 suites. The guy was asking $1,100. What he marketed it for $1,100. We go in, talk to the broker, tell him, okay, I think we'll take this property. We want this one. And when we submitted the LOI and he saw that it was cannabis, we were standing there and we handed it over. And there was the broker and the owner. He had a lease agreement and he snatched it out of my partner's hand and said, oh, we'll get right back with you. And
let me guess, the $1,100 became $3,100.
No, in fact, now they come back. Suddenly that building had 2 suites in it. The suite that we were in was now $7,000 a month.
Yep.
It was not a triple net prior.
Okay, in short, the price just significantly went up.
It shot through the roof.
Figured.
And the dilapidated building, which he was willing to fix up to put a tenant in, he now said, hey, all the ceiling tiles and the roofing and the busted pipes and the broken AC, that's going to be on you, buddy. So we said, okay, we're not doing this. And we went around, turned out everyone did the same thing. But I think, it was a new industry. We got in there early. And I imagine that's less the case these days. But yeah, that was a fun way to start.
I was not surprised when you said that he snatched the lease out of your hands or out of your partner's hands. And I'm thinking, okay, the $1,100 just tripled, if not more.
Oh,
right?
much more.
Yeah. Well, because he had leverage. Right. I mean,
ton of leverage.
They knew what the market is like. And the fact that they were willing to be open-minded and negotiate with you, there was a price to pay for it.
There was. And it did change the budget. I came in where
Sure.
I'd perform it out what this was going to take.
So how did you process your profitability at that point? Because you knew suddenly you're anticipating X for costs. Now it's just
Right.
quadrupled, if not more, right?
And that was just on the rent. So
right.
in order to get a license, you not only had to have a lease, but you had to have a certificate of occupancy through the city of Oklahoma, through Oklahoma City. That was, checked off. Inspectors come in and check it off. Well, we now have a dilapidated building that, so
Right.
we did not get our license and open our door till August. We started this process in February because we had the lease. We had to go in there and fix this entire building, get it ADA compliant, and do everything on our
What was the
dime.
budget like to fix that place
So
up?
it basically ended up costing us a total of somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 to get the store open, and that barely maybe $40,000 of that went into product. So the earliest, sometimes we'll look at photos of the first few days of opening the store. There's barely any product in there because so much of the liquidity I'd set aside for this just got eaten up getting this thing open. But we did it. We stayed the course.
Yep.
We did it, and it worked out. My partner worked his ass off, and it worked out.
Wow, what a journey, right?
Oh yeah, just to get open, it was stressful.
And of course, once you get open, you don't know the profitability, and you don't know how you're going to do moving forward.
But we had a fixed monthly expense.
Yeah,
we had a target of we had a capital contribution target to earn back. And the one thing I'll hand my partner, he worked the store, and we started at $100 a day, if that, got that figure up. And the major turning point ended up being when COVID happened, believe it or not. So my partner had already gotten us to a pretty handsome daily figure. I think we were doing through just a lot of hard work on the ground marketing, because there were rules against marketing. You couldn't just put it up on a billboard at the time in Oklahoma or do any of that. Facebook wouldn't let you market. Google wouldn't let you market. So a lot of guerrilla marketing, as my partner says.
So give me an example of a typical marketing campaign that you guys used.
Honestly, what we were doing back then was a lot of word of mouth. So my partner, we printed these cards that had a first-time customer discount. And my partner was going, we had people that would go and, stick them on cars at other dispensaries. So old school. He's an old school guy. He has no problem with aggressive competition.
Okay.
And then he would go to bars. Actually, he was really smart about going to bars and restaurants, but initially close to the store, making friends with these guys and saying, hey, just hand these cards out and you guys come by as well. So he did just a lot of in-person networking. We got more and more people through the door, focused on service, priced ourselves competitively. And it was when COVID happened that he was agile. He was extremely agile. So now it's 2020. So we're almost a year, not quite a year into the business, that the storefront was generating probably about $3,000 a day in revenue. And that was profitable, not strikingly profitable, but it was profitable. And when COVID happened, my partner reacted so quickly.
Was it deemed an essential business?
This is Oklahoma, so I don't know if you even had to be deemed an essential business. Okay. You just had to follow some general guidelines. I mean, look, it's Oklahoma. Okay. This was not New York or San Francisco.
Did you guys have any challenges with Oklahoma officials from OMA coming in to do surveys or anything like that?
Initially they were not thrilled. These are older conservative folks that just they said, okay, I guess we're doing this. The state has mandated it. They weren't friendly, but we did we leaned in. We took a very proactive approach. I told them to the extent that I understood, as long as your doors are open and you're as upfront with these folks as possible. And my partner's a charming guy. We let them in, followed their instructions. They give you corrective action plans.
Sure.
But if you take a what's the term I'm looking for? An aggressive stance on them, they're going to push right back.
Sure. You become defensive, they become more aggressive.
100%.
Right.
So that's not what we did. We said, okay, let us know. We just want to do this right. And they ended up being pretty good. It took the time that it took. But again, we were in early. If we had done it even a year later, there would have been a big backlog of dispensaries trying to open, and it might have taken a whole lot longer.
It would have been more expensive too.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so let's pivot a little bit. Did you let's talk a little bit about Eden Rose itself.
Sure.
You mentioned storefronts, and just to be clear, the Eden Rose enterprise, your company, is essentially an overall brand of the Eden Rose brand. But underneath Eden Rose, there are multiple verticals. We'll just call them verticals. You have 3 retail shops. My understanding is you have one in Edmond, one in Oklahoma City, and one on South Side, which is essentially Oklahoma City, right?
The south side of Oklahoma City.
Yeah, and so you have the 3 storefronts. But in addition to that, you also have a processing vertical as well. Okay. And when you process, do you also do B2B business, or how do you sell your products to other other competitors?
We do. It's now become about 25% of our total revenue.
Okay.
6 figures a month of revenue, B2B. Technically, we also sell that product into our 3 storefronts. But yeah, we've got probably 200 dispensaries that buy from us reliably. We've got 7 brands that we have trademarked within the state of Oklahoma. So we produce pre-rolls, cartridges of a pretty significant variety. We also now are extracting. So we have BHO extraction and rosin extraction, which is solventless extraction. And we produce a pretty significant range of edibles as well. So we're doing just about everything a processor does. And what's interesting is what motivated this was a sluggish, overpriced market. Okay. So my partner's a go-getter, and he said, look, it's going to cost money, but the market is not servicing us. They're asking for too much, and there's not enough guys here. He didn't like the quality of what they were putting out, cartridges, edibles, and he said they're asking way too much money, and they were selling to everybody. They weren't giving us a competitive advantage. So that's what motivated us to get into processing. He says, I need to make my own stuff.
But just to be clear, this is in Oklahoma, all part of their medical cannabis program.
This is all medical.
Right.
That's correct.
So,
seed to sale, grown in Oklahoma.
Yep.
And processed in Oklahoma and sold in Oklahoma.
And of course, in Oklahoma, as we both know, you have to have a license to cultivate. You have to have a license to manufacture / process.
Correct.
And you have to have a separate license for retail purposes.
That's correct.
So it sounds like you're outside of cultivation, you're almost semi-vertically integrated by having those multiple licenses. Do you do transport as well?
We do our own transport for larger customers. The cost benefit leans in our favor, but there are customers now that are, let's say border dispensaries along the border that are at a significant distance where we use a transport company. Okay. But we have a couple of guys that have gotten their transport license, and that's, you're always kind of trying to balance the equation on that. But now we have specific customers to whom we will deliver product if it's a $5,000 or $10,000 transaction in a single delivery. But if it's a smaller there's customers that buy $200 worth of stuff. And for them, we just add on the cost as a separate line item for the cost of delivery.
So as a medical dispensary in Oklahoma, are you forming relationships with physicians? Are you forming relationships with just consumers? What type of relationships do you form in Oklahoma to really see your dispensaries thrive?
It's been a consumer engagement. There's other than the good fortune of my partner understanding the product, he's also a pretty righteous Southern man who said, hey, the market's overcharging. I would tell him, hey, if the market's willing to charge this much and they're paying it, charge it. He said, no, they're charging too much. So we always priced ourselves effectively, and I've had a pretty significant customer service focus, as in let's really walk these folks through and find what they're looking for, even if it ends up being a less profitable or a smaller total transaction. And his big thing, he's pretty passionate about cannabis. So not just the business, but also that, hey, this helps people. He would always tell me the narrative prior of people that were on all kinds of prescriptions that were able to wean off and move to cannabis. So he, as a consequence of him being so fair in pricing, we have a really significant range of customers. So you walk into the store, you'll see someone deep into their 80s, maybe in a wheelchair coming in,
It's
looking
always
for their
interesting to
product.
see, right? Because
Yeah.
they're essentially from the generation of reefer madness.
Oh, big time.
And that's stigmatized the entire industry.
time.
But now they're consumers and now they
Absolutely.
need it, right? So it's, I don't want to call it hypocritical, but in some ways the generation has stigmatized an entire industry, but now that they need it, they're consumers.
Well, a lot of these people might have been consumers back then. It was just risky.
It could,
for them.
yes,
You know what
of
I mean?
course,
So,
of course.
but yeah, we've been principally focused on, as far as the dispensaries are concerned, customer engagement, word of mouth. Now, if you go to Oklahoma City, you're going to see our billboards up, and we've taken a more aggressive stance in presenting ourselves.
So let's go back to the consumers. You said all walks of life, pretty much.
Correct.
Man. You have an 80-year-old in a wheelchair. You could have a guy who's, I don't know, 25 years old.
Correct.
You
Low
know,
to high income, variety of different professions.
What would you say is the average in the sense as age and type of qualifying conditions that drive them into your dispensaries for what purpose?
So we've got, if I had to guess, and this would be valuable for me to take a look at, but if I'm guessing, I'd say 25 to 35, you know, middle income earners, and they are a very significant portion of people are weaning themselves off of prescription drugs, which I did not anticipate. I did not know that, but I've seen this happen where they're thanking my partner who loves to just be at the shop and engage with customers, saying, man, you know, I was on painkillers, or I was on sleeping pills, or I was on anti-anxiety pills, and this has fit in quite nicely. And not all of these people are smoking flower. You know, many of them are using edibles or using tinctures or doing something else. But yeah, you know, it's probably what you'd expect. 25 to 35. The vast majority of revenue, if we place it that way, we're enthusiasts. It fits into their life in some manner or the other, oftentimes recreationally, probably. And
of course, in Oklahoma, it's really easy to get your hands on medical.
I believe so.
Comparably to other states.
Yeah, I don't know how tough it is in other states. All my friends have them, friends that have no medical issues. I think the narrative I've heard, I actually don't have one. I don't know if they're handing.
And there's
them
a card program in Oklahoma. You
There's
actually
a
have to
card
show
program.
your card. There's no card program here.
Yeah, you do have, to enter the premises and remain on the premises and transact with us. You must show your medical.
That's right.
Medical license. But you know, the story is always, oh, you just tell me you got something with your eyes, glaucoma or something like that, and the doctor just kind of signs it off. I've heard that in Colorado. I've heard that in California. I don't know for sure, but I don't believe it's distinctly difficult in Oklahoma per se. I don't know for sure.
Okay, so you have this medical card program. How do you guys verify the prescription?
So there's a couple of simple measures. You know, you can run it under a black light, and now at this stage, the softwares, the point of sale softwares we use, you can quickly scan them and just verify that it's still up to date, so on and so forth. It's a tough card to forge. It's not that straightforward. It's a nice encrypted card. Okay. So we can just scan them in. In the early days, there were people that clearly had bunk cards, and our stance was, hey, we're not doing anything illegal. If we don't feel comfortable, we will refuse the customer.
So how do you feel about the metric system the seed to sell software? Isn't it? It's mandated now as of about a year ago.
And it was tough. That was a tough.
Because that's an extra cost.
It's an extra cost.
But
of course,
it's an extra burden too.
It was. What was tough was we were already. I don't know. Was that last year or was that the year before?
I want to say it was September of last year.
Last year is when you needed to be live, but it took many months to get into it.
That's right.
And what had happened is you had an industry, and our business infrastructure, wholesale was kicking. At that time, we were probably already doing 70,000 to 80,000 a month of B2B sales, those are cheap units. Okay, one thing we haven't discussed: Oklahoma is inexpensive. Okay, the cost of goods at point of sale they must be the lowest in the country. We have to sell very competitively. So wholesale is even more competitive. So we had built this whole infrastructure. We had ways of doing things. You know, hey, if we only sold 200 units of a product, we only made 200 units of a product. But now you've got all these metric standards that complicated things significantly. And it seemed to complicate things most significantly for the growers because they had to tag it from the seed and place multiple tags on it. Whereas, prior to that, I don't know exactly how they were doing it. But it created a lot of
what kind of burdens did it create for you guys, and as a processor, as a retailer?
You had to the principal thing was you had to be able to track that product. So we as processors are not the cultivator. We are buying either flower and extracting from it, or buying pre-extracted, we call it distillate or resin, rosin, all those products, and putting them into edibles or cartridges.
That's right.
But in that step, you do have to retest the product. So just because Richard's, OG Kush is tested, once we convert that to, let's say, even a pre-roll, believe it or not, the same flower crushed up, now put in a pre-roll, must be retested. And what this has done. What are you
testing for?
They're testing for contaminants, which is would prevent it from reaching the shelves, and then other cannabinoids and terpenes, et cetera, which then either help deliver value to the product or not. So Richard walks in, he's got $20 to spend. He might prioritize taste, which is typically through terpenes, taste and smell, while TJ might prioritize just pure THC content. So that the testing is essential in that manner as well. That hey, what are the characteristics? But of course, if there's contaminants, it's not going on the shelf.
Okay, so you're testing. What are you doing with the data once you test it? And do you do the testing
yourself? You have to place that on a tag. No, these are third-party labs. We've had some fun journeys with those too.
Okay, tell us about the labs that you use.
So there's a few labs in the state, and some of them are good at what they do, and some of them are absolutely horrible at what they do.
But that's the case everywhere.
That's in all businesses across all industries. So we have landed at a good lab. They take a core portion of product. So they're not going to actually test a pound of cannabis. They take a representative portion of that product. That's right. And you have to clearly define the volume and the mass of the product you're delivering. And based on that, they tell you, here's how much THC, here are the other cannabinoid and terpene qualities. And does this have contaminants in it that would be a risk to the consumer? And we have a pretty darn good record. That's a part of picking good partners. Vendors. We haven't had too many issues with contaminants. It can be interesting sometimes, the papers. For example, we wanted to start making our own blunts, pre-rolled blunts at one point. Pre-rolls are a big part of the business. So my partner wanted to do it. He bought...
Would you say that's probably one of the more profitable products that you have, are the pre-rolls?
Profitable, not necessarily. But it's amongst... not necessarily the most profitable, but it moves. So it represents a very significant portion of total flower sales. We do count it. I mean, we when we look at the data, we see, hey, this sold as a pre-roll. But for our purposes, we think of it as a part of the flower sales, which is still flower dominates. Right. Flower is still 80 to 90% of the total consumption in cannabis, and pre-rolls or blunts, et cetera, are a big part of that. Huge part. More, I did not intuit that. I'm not a guy, when I would go to California or Colorado, I'm not a guy buying a pre-roll.
Okay.
But it's a big part of it. And what can happen in testing is the paper might have a contaminant. The flower was fine. We already had the testing.
So what do you do if it's not the actual product, but it's part of the paper, which obviously is part of the final product itself?
Well, pre-metric. Okay. You let the lab know, hey, we think something might be off, et cetera, discuss it with them, and resubmit for testing, right? Okay. I mean, we don't want a contaminated product in the market. That is a terrible liability for a business. So we would, looking at the testing provided by the supplier, say, hey, no, we think this is good. This must have been some other factor. Maybe the cartridge had something. Maybe the paper had something. Now, post-metric, that product is tagged. So now that negative test is associated with that product, and you have effectively, and if you had, let's say, $10,000 worth of that product, you got yourself a problem. Even though that testing may have been faulty, that tag is now associated with a negative result that prevents it from entering the line of sale, the sales pipeline. So you have to, through a much more formal, sluggish channel, ask for that to be retested and reassigned, or you have to scrap that product.
Wow, that's a lot of money to scrap.
We have had to scrap a whole lot of product, my friend.
Have you gotten products, whether it's distillate or something else, or paper from a third party, where it's caused your product to be either faulty or having contaminants? And if so, what do you do? Do you seek remedies against them, or do you just purge it and move on? And
in the short term, you have to purge and move on. And then this is probably similar to a lot of other businesses, but then yes, you do seek remediation from the supplier. So distillate is a big one where they'll give you a certain test result and say, oh, it's great. So it's, you want 90.
But then your testing results differ from theirs.
And then you say, dude, what the hell?
Yeah.
Right. Now there are qualities you can look for. And but sometimes it happens. If you're buying 10, 20, 30 pounds of flour, you might not, they might have tucked in a few that had some mold on it or wasn't quite what you thought you were going to buy. You can only look at so much. So that type of stuff has happened, and it's not so different. You have to go back and tell them, hey, this ain't right, buddy. And if they're shady enough, they'll say, hey, you bought it, it's yours now. And then you have to kind of let the market know what's going on. And fortunately, we've got a strong name in the market, so guys don't want us telling the market that they can't be trusted.
Sure, no, it's a killer for their business as well.
Yeah.
So moving forward, how do you see Eden Rose grow, or do you no pun intended, but how do you want to grow it, or do you want to look at other verticals, or what do you want to do with Eden Rose?
Well, we've been growing consistently, right? Yep. We started with the first retail location, got into processing, went into B2B, wholesaling product and making our own product. So we actually, other than flour, there is nothing in our stores that is purchased from outside other than flour. We make absolutely everything, every type of cartridge, every type of extract. And initially I was frustrated at the notion. I kept telling my partner, hey, you got to leverage the market. But it's turned into a pretty significant benefit for us, an advantage for us. We have our second two locations. One, we applied for a license and opened that, started from scratch. The third, most recent location, we actually purchased a distressed property. There's now a moratorium on new dispensary, grow, and processing licenses. They are not allowing them. Chances are they're going to extend that.
Oklahoma, I think it's been about a year and a half, hasn't it?
It's been a year and a half. There's about 2.5 years left.
Yep.
And what they're basically saying is way too many guys moved in. Most of these people don't know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's the case anymore, but I know at one point Oklahoma had more licensees than any other state in the country.
More than many states combined.
Yeah.
Because they had a very loose policy for getting people in, which benefited them, but ended up hurting in the long run. A lot of people with some small sum of money and not a whole lot of business acumen got in. Actually, I feel for a lot of these people. They've sunk a lot of their hopes and dollars into it.
Trust me, I know. A couple of people I've represented over the years. Now they want to sell.
Right.
So
there were, there are some distressed. There was some distressed assets out there. We liked the location.
Yeah.
Picked it up, and in less than a month, we were doing 1,000% more sales a day, just because we had a model in place and we were our wholesale supplier. More of that is likely what we would do when seeking growth. Right now, we're in a holding pattern because one of the vast majority of dispensaries, grows, and processors are distressed as it stands. So we are amongst the proud few that have always run a strong, profitable business and really thought things through. I think that's what I brought to the business. Hey, here's how you structure a business and make it sustainable, right? And a lot of people have the chops and the passion, but you have to actually create a sustainable business. So we're in a holding pattern because one of the things failing businesses do is they undersell to get back as much liquidity. So there's a little bit of a pricing mess on hand, but it's slowly softening. But we're in a holding pattern. We've got these two secondary locations doing absolutely fantastic. And not quite the revenue of our main location, our original location, but they're in smaller markets. And we're in a holding pattern. We're slowly introducing more product to the market, optimizing the businesses, getting rid of slow movers.
Give me an example of a new product that you're introducing to the market.
So for example, this is real basic, but one thing that we have done is start to let the market bring products to us. And the more and more of them are coming. Vendors keep showing up because we're an established commodity in Oklahoma City. So, for example, we're strong in pre-rolls and we make all our own. And we had a vendor show up that said, hey, look, there's these now glass tip cones, pre-roll cones that you put into machines. And that's been a hit. We said, hey, this is something different. Let's give it a shot. And we produced it, took the risk on the front end, produced it, got a metric tag, put a little brand on it. It takes 3-4 months to get the product out,
Okay.
tested, verified. And we like to run it under an official brand. We don't just white label. Put it out on the shelf and did great. New types of edibles incorporating live resin and rosin into both edibles and cartridges. Again, it takes time. You have to buy the hardware. You have to make sure, when you're running something on a vape, you have to mix in glycerin, et cetera. It has to actually run. Otherwise, those are, they consume that product on a hot plate or however it works. So constantly bringing live resin and rosin into edibles and cartridges. New strains of cannabis constantly coming onto the shelves.
Is that an expensive process?
What's up?
Buying from like third parties and having to essentially retest it and essentially you're repackaging it and putting it on your shelves.
Per unit,
Yeah.
it's going to cost you less, but upfront, it's definitely going to cost you more. So if
Okay.
it doesn't take off, if it's not a product that begins to sell in significant volumes, then it's typically not worth it. And that's been a part of our journey.
So you take a hit financially.
Oh, there's no doubt. Or,
yeah.
I mean, you have to have it requires all business requires discipline.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it successfully, right? The passion only goes so far. So that has been a journey. And Metric made that exceedingly more imperative that, hey, if it's not, it's no longer worth producing a product that we sell 50 units of a month. It's just makes absolutely no sense.
And it's both interesting to see, and I almost feel a sense of compassion to the industry and some of the stakeholders, right? Is that what you do find is a lot of passion and a lot of drive, but maybe not the ability or the foresight to say, okay, these are strategies we're using or to make it profitable. You do see a lot of unprofitable businesses in this industry.
In a lot of industries, but another thing this business is marred with is you're not going to get a lot of people yet, at least in Oklahoma. I can't speak. I'm sure in California it's different, but people that have the competence and qualifications from just the business world are not yet comfortable. We had a couple of guys, that we hired off of Indeed that had, let's say, accounting experience from a variety, they could have worked in Lowe's or these companies. And when they showed up and see a bunch of, people with tattoos up to their eyeballs, that are stoned all day, they didn't feel comfortable. So what you had were people ready to work hard, but not people that had the experience in accounting, in inventory management, or people that hadn't woken up to the idea that, hey, you think you're a functional stoner, you're not. I had to kick that policy in. We were lenient early on.
Oh, that's interesting.
And a lot of these young guys, and what they were doing before they joined, they had their jobs, but what they were doing before they came. And they had an idealistic vision of what it would look like to come and work in the space officially.
Sure.
And they think they can wake up and rip a bong and come in and be effective. And
there's levels to being a functional stoner.
Oh yeah. and those people that are some of the most disciplined people. They work out. Those people that are truly functional stoners, and they're sure as hell not, ripping bongs all day long, so those barriers have been difficult. And so, you might have the drive, you might be willing to organize this, organize that, but you really have to run the numbers and you have to make tough decisions. And we're getting better and better at that.
Good. Good. So are there any desires, any endeavors here in Texas beyond Oklahoma?
Of course. I mean, look, if I could have, more proximity to a business. I have a lot of faith in myself as a businessman. These two ventures have been difficult, high effort, high dollar ventures. That's not what I'm used to. I'm not a tech guy. I'm not I didn't start some software or do any of that stuff. Not to say that it's easy, but I know the grind. I know how to manage people and manage my money. I built both the businesses debt free with my own capital. I would love to be involved in the state of Texas, but as I've learned from you there, first of all, it's Texas. It's not Oklahoma. There's more people in DFW than all of Oklahoma. So the financial barriers of entry are going to be more significant. There's some big old boys, as you had described to me, getting into the business, big funds, 9-figure guys jumping in. And the states, that's what they want. They want people with financial capacity to get into it. But absolutely, I would love to do this business here. I've learned a whole lot in Oklahoma, and I would love to do this business here. But right now we're focused on optimizing these businesses, making them more profitable. And I'm, in terms of where this business goes, I think we're going to continue to add product and add customers on the B2B side, and probably slowly add locations. But I'd be enthusiastic at the notion of seeking sales of individual locations or individual assets that we've created. I'm open. We're doing it now. I deem it a success, and we're just going to keep trucking forward.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned your parents didn't want you to go to Oberlin. What was? I mean, obviously you're of Indian descent.
My parents don't know about the cannabis business.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, so that's
know?
Okay.
Well, they will now after watching the Sativa segment.
Let's see. Hopefully they're not watching too many cannabis podcasts. But
so was there a reason to not tell them?
I actually haven't told too. I don't tell as I've grown. I'm not telling too many people too much of what's happening in my life. But no, I just think it would make them anxious. There's still a taboo about this industry.
I think that's where I'm going with it, right? Is that earlier, as you were telling me about your parents didn't want you to go Oberlin or play football, right? So right there, I knew that your parents were probably somewhat conservative, right? And they probably have an old school Indian mindset. And let's just be honest, call it what it is. It's a cultural. It's a cultural thing, and so talking to older traditional Indian cultured parents about your investment in operations in cannabis, that can't be an easy discussion.
Well, with my parents in particular, and probably a lot of traditional Indian parents, it's all about risk assessment. So what they want is for you to be successful. Financially and in terms of your respect in society, which is why they'll push you towards law. They want, they would love what you do. Be a lawyer, be an engineer, be a doctor. That's also a risk reward calculation that, hey, once you have achieved that, the risk element of your financial future has minimized. So they'd actually probably be quite happy if I told them about it today, because it is a successful 7-figure business earning a handsome amount of profit. What would be difficult to say, well, why didn't you tell us sooner? That's the only reason I'm not talking about it now. But they'd be thrilled. They didn't want me to get into the tile business either. But
so the conversation probably would have been very different had you told them about cannabis back in 2019.
Yeah, they'd be like, no, you're going to lose all your money. This is going to be a fiasco. What about, you'll get robbed or something will happen. The unknown is quite stressful. My father's a doctor, mom's a lawyer, hardworking, work till your eyes are bleeding type of people. So they don't necessarily, now they'd be thrilled. Oh, you got yourself a successful business of some kind.
I find that dynamic really interesting, because I still remember telling my parents when I decided to fall into the cannabis industry, and the feedback I got from my own dad was, why do you want to get into this? You have a thriving healthcare practice. This is kind of it's kind of a rogue business. And things could happen. This could happen, and then of course, now I'm 10 years into it. The conversation's very different now.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. It'll happen. It'll come down the pipeline, or maybe I can avoid it altogether, and I'd be fine with that as well.
Now, where do you think, just in general, where do you think the industry's going in Oklahoma and on a national front, just in your own personal opinion? Yeah,
well, based on what I've studied about California, Colorado, because I've now taken many trips back. They've gone full rec. So that, of course, is coming to Oklahoma, and that will slowly come to every market once the state is comfortable with the revenue they earn and feel as though they have things under control. As it happened in California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and other such markets, there's, where the cream is rising to the top. The market will be better established. There's already modes of consolidation, which we're a part of. We've now purchased a distressed dispensary and so on and so forth. And so in Oklahoma, I think that is happening as we speak. People are dropping out of the race, hoping they can get some money for their license now that there's a moratorium. Even that's not as straightforward as it looks. So the market's going to optimize. There's going to be some degree of consolidation. Big money guys are starting to move in. Now that it's stabilizing, you're starting to see some groups from California come in, from Colorado. These are the two states where the big dogs are at, and Washington. Because they've been at it for so long. So just on a pure business end, that's what's happening. And then, of course, for Oklahoma, recreational will come down the pipeline. We will have to get used to 40 some percent tax per dollar of product sold. How they're going to manage, they have different rules in different states. In Colorado, if you go to a dispensary, they'll have this half of the space is medical. If you have your card and everything's cheaper, this half is recreational.
Yeah.
In other places, they have to be completely separated. And in some places, I've been to dispensaries.
But it's funny. I know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm familiar with that.
Right.
But the actual product itself doesn't differ that much.
No, it's the same product.
So-
You're going to pay a whole lot more. And in recreation, here's one thing that has happened recreationally. They give you very serious maximum doses. You have small maximum doses. So today, we sell 500 milligram bags of edibles. We actually have a 10,000 milligram bag of edibles. Recreation, I don't think they let you exceed 100 milligrams per package.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting. It's something we're looking forward to. It almost passed in Oklahoma. It did not. And so we said, okay, no big deal. Let's keep rolling.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be an interesting kind of automatic growth path for us. What we're hoping is, if Richard with a medical card walks in, we can just put have the same tag on the product. One is for if you're a medical patient, here's your price. And if you're recreational, here's your price.
Mm-hmm.
If they force us to operate out of two separate spaces, we'll deal with it accordingly. But we're going to ride that wave as soon as it comes up. We're constantly monitoring what's happening in the courts about that.
Well, kudos to you guys. That's
Thank you.
awesome. It sounds like you're doing well.
So
Obviously,
far, so good.
after a year plus of you being a client, we finally get to talk a little bit more in depth about your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Happy about that. Any last one-liner statements about what you want to do and anything about your business?
Well, hey, I want to continue growing this. I think it's a great space, and it's one. If you have investment capital, it's worth exploring in states like Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, and all of these traditionally conservative states are actually some of the most friendly places. Mm-hmm. So if you can find a good partner, and you have some competence in business, you have some discipline, it's not a bad space to go look at investing in. Mm-hmm. And I need you to keep me posted on when I can get into it in Texas. That's
absolutely. That's what I'm here for.
All right.
Well, hey, thank you so much for making the time to come in. It's been enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is great.
All right. Thanks, TJ.